Hi, everyone. We're just waiting until we have a full room of people. A lot of people registered for this event, so we'll just wait for them until we introduce our program. All right, so I guess I'll get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this AJC campus crash course, Why Are Student Governments So Obsessed with Israel? My name is Greenberg. I'm a sophomore at Hunter College High School in Manhattan. I'm also a proud alumni of AJC's Leader for Tomorrow program. LIFT, as we call it, helps high school students to develop the skills and tools necessary to become strong Jewish leaders and advocates on our campuses and beyond. And one idea that we discussed throughout the program is that how we as proud Zionists can continue to defend Israel on campus, especially against the divisive BDS movement. So today, I'm very excited to have the opportunity to introduce and to listen to these phenomenal student advocates discuss their experiences handling tricky student government situations and how those experiences allowed them to help change the conversation on their campuses. So today, we're privileged to have Zachary Kimmel, a rising senior at Columbia University, Mara Davis, a recent graduate of New York University, and Jack Langen, a recent graduate of the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign and a former vice president of their student government. And Jacqueline Subar, the Assistant Director of Political Outreach at AJC, will be moderating our conversation today. And of course, there'll be a time at the end for a Q&A. So to submit any questions you may have to our panelists, please just email your questions to campus@ajc.org. So thank you so much. And with that, Jackie, you have the floor.
Great. Thank you so much, Leo. I really appreciate you offering up a wonderful introduction. Hi to all of our viewers out there from here in the United States as well as abroad. I'm so excited to be here with our wonderful panelists, really incredible students who have done just amazing work in their student government while on campus. Just to voice off once again an introduction, feel free to go around starting with Zach, to Tamara, to Jack. Just tell us who you are and where you either went to school or where you currently go to school.
Hi everybody, my name is Zachary Kimmel and I'm a rising senior at Columbia.
Hi, my name is Mara Davis and I graduated from NYU in December.
Hi, my name's Jack Langen and I graduated from University of Illinois this past May.
Awesome. Mazel tov to our new graduates. Just a little bit of background. We've got a number of students who are on the line or watching on the line who are either going to college soon or are currently in college. So just to start off with our first question, which is very college oriented. When you entered college, what did you think you would want to have gotten involved in? And what helped you choose your school? We'll go reverse. Jack, Mara, then Zach.
Awesome. So coming from like a small Southern Illinois town, I knew I wanted to like get out of my comfort zone and kind of go to a school where I didn't know many people. And I guess University of Illinois really appealed to me because it was really good academically, kind of close-ish to home. And I didn't know anyone. So I just was able to dive into a whole new university experience. I guess going in, I joined a fraternity, but I really wanted to like get involved with things that I could actually make a difference and have an impact on students. So I found that through student government, doing various things like move-in day for freshmen, things like that. But yeah.
Mara?
I mean, I think going in, I really had no clue what I wanted. And I think it took me 2 years in to really figure that out. I had been an athlete in high school, and so I was a rower. I had planned on trying to row in college, and that ended up not happening due to an injury, which I think was the biggest blessing in disguise. And so I started my college career at Vanderbilt. I'm from New York, and I thought I wanted to get as far away from home as possible. I thought I wanted a small school, and I thought I wanted Greek life, and it turns out that was not for me at all. And so I transferred after 2 years. I realized I wanted the total opposite of that. I found myself at NYU. And funny enough, although it has become, or it did become such a big part of my college career, Jewish life was never really a consideration for me. And I just kind of was blessed with how it all fell into place.
Pretty similar, actually, to Mara. I was originally going to Duke. That was the school I had committed to, and I was waitlisted at Columbia. And when I got off of the waitlist at Columbia, I had this really big decision to make. I loved Duke. I loved the sports culture. I loved the idea of getting away from home. I grew up in Brooklyn, and I thought Columbia was a little too close to home. I stuck around, though, and I ended up visiting for a second time and fell in love with Columbia, made the decision to come, and I'm really happy that I did. I expected to get really involved in political life on campus, both student government, but also just sort of student political organizations. I started Columbia's voting rights organization my sophomore year. Jewish life wasn't really in the plan at the beginning, but I have been so amazed at how welcoming and inclusive and strong the Columbia Jewish community is. And I've really found a home in Jewish life at Columbia that I really did not expect when I came into school a few years ago.
Wow. It seems like it's a combination of individuals who are like, I am going to this university, it's where I'm going, and people that were like, I miss home. Home is where the heart is. Student government. So off of what you're saying, Zach, student governments, from my understanding, and for our viewers out there who are not on campus quite yet, or are, but interested in student government, they all tend to operate a little bit differently depending on what university they're at and the relationship with the university they even have. Can you tell us, Zach, a little bit about student government's responsibilities at Columbia and the role that they play on campus?
Sure. So student council kind of generally, so Columbia is a very decentralized place. I wonder if our other panelists will speak about this too. Each undergraduate college at Columbia, so Columbia College, which is co-ed liberal arts, the College of Engineering, Barnard College is our affiliated all-women's college across the street, and also general studies, all have their own student councils. I'm in Columbia College, so co-ed liberal arts, so I was on Columbia College Student Council. The idea is to advocate for student needs to the administration and also to cultivate campus life and campus camaraderie. There are different elected positions based on grade. Each grade has a little sort of mini council, president, vice president, and a few reps. And then there are some sort of issue-specific representatives. I was the academic affairs representative my sophomore year. There are race and ethnicity representatives, first gen, low-income student representative, and then those all operate underneath the executive board. So president, vice president for policy, vice president for finance, vice president for communications, and vice president for campus life. And that's kind of the general structure. But generally, it's to advocate for student needs to the administrators and particularly sort of have relationships with your specific administrator. I worked a lot with the dean of academic affairs because that was my kind of obvious relationship, but also to cultivate a strong sense of campus life through different events and different events on campus.
Gotcha. Would you say, Jack, that your experience is similar to Zach's or different?
So I'd say the setup is a little bit different. The way our student government works at our school is there's elected officials from each section of college. So we'll have LASA, LASB, and it could be different from Spanish, economics, different engineers, and they all have representatives that are elected and then serve in a general body. And then the executive branch, president, vice president, is elected differently. And really, it's just the two of us. And then we have a chief of staff, communications director, everything like that. I think that's really interesting, Zach, that you have representatives from maybe a low income representative or from various cultural houses, because I think that would be great for us. But really kind of similar, we just work with administration, specifically student affairs, to just try to advocate for the student body and possibly hold administration accountable when it comes to things like sexual assault reform, various things like that. We'll do different climate rallies, DACA rallies, just a lot of student engagement to let our student body know that they have a voice through us. And yeah, it's interesting how it's a little bit different than how it's set up. But yeah.
Mara, somewhere in between, somewhere closer to Zach, closer to Jack.
I mean, in terms of stated goals of student government as a whole, I think it's pretty similar across the board. Structure is definitely a little bit more similar to Columbia's. I think just due to the nature of it being a more similar school. So we have a student government assembly that's comprised of the Student Senators Council and the President's Council. And that's the SGA is part of a larger university governance structure that ultimately reports back to the university Senate, which like the president sits on, and the Board of Trustees. And so the SGA as a whole kind of acts, I guess, as a liaison between the student body and the university Senate. And so kind of similar to what Zach was saying, so we have the Student Senators Council who are elected per school. So we have College of Arts and Sciences, we have Tandon School of Engineering. And so each school has a senator that's elected by the students in that school. But then we also have something called senators at large, which are constituency based. And so these senators are appointed, and there's only 14 seats. And so they self-select the constituency that they want to represent. And these can be anything from student athletes to student identity groups.
Gotcha. Looks like student government is big at all of your campuses, it seems, and the interaction that they have between themselves and the administration seems to be quite large. We're going to launch into the topic that we're here to discuss, and I'm going to start with Jack. Jack, I know that when you were VP, Vice President of Student Government at U of I, it was during a pretty eventful year that included a BDS referendum, and also, though, the drafting of the definition on what constitutes anti-Semitism on campus, which for any of our viewers watching is relatively rare. How did student government even become a space on campus for that kind of conversation?
So that specific instance where they passed a resolution that it said the conflation of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism to basically say a definition for each, that arose from a mass mail regarding a presentation that a Palestinian student did that a lot of Jewish students on our campus found as anti-Semitic. So a mass mail went out kind of condemning that presentation, and there was a big reaction from SJP and other Palestinian groups to basically have them retract that mass mail and say that anti-Zionism it necessarily isn't anti-Semitism. So they basically went through students and our student government to basically pass this resolution. And I remember for the actual meeting before where they were deciding the various definitions, one of the Jewish students suggested that they incorporate a working definition to define anti-Semitism. And it was basically torn apart by the people in that committee. And by the end of the meeting, it was basically just decided we're going to switch back to the original definition. I think it was like the Oxford Dictionary definition or something like that. And it was really sad to see when it actually passed. There was probably 400 Palestinian students and people who supported them, and then 400 Jewish students. And all the Jewish students had a walkout to honor the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting victims. And after that, it basically turned into like a rally basically within our student government in support of this resolution. There was a ton of people who just went up and spoke. And that's like really the first time I'd been exposed to like how divisive and how important like this topic is, to see like two groups so divided over something like that, and to see our Jewish population like not feel like they have a voice through us. That was really tough to see, but that's kind of how it worked for that.
As a student who's is not a Jewish student on campus, or was not a Jewish student on campus, you just graduated, how did the event impact your experience with student government?
I would say at first it like just made me really sad that members of our student government weren't taking a large portion of our student population's voices like seriously, because the emotion that was like displayed in both the BDS resolution and the anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism one, it's almost like some members of our student government disregarded it based on their like prior feelings about what's right. Like, we're going to support Palestinian students, but at the same time, you need to support both. After that, the conversation really just continued with Palestinian students, Jewish students, and it definitely took a toll on a lot of people within our student government. And personally, I don't think we should have even touched the issue to begin with. I don't think that's necessarily the place of our student government to make decisions that divide two important groups on campus. But yeah, it really shifted the energy of what we were trying to do and accomplish.
That was the next question I was actually going to ask you. So you've already answered the question. I feel like throughout this time when we're here, we'll see kind of a theme of what it means for these issues to come up in student government and whether that's the space for them or not. Just a reminder, by the way, to our audience, if you have questions, please be sending them in, and we can't wait to answer them. Zach, segueing over to you, you sat on student government at Columbia, and I know that you had you were very excited to join onto student government. You had campaigned and everything and got on, and you ended up resigning from your post. What happened that made you make the decision to leave?
Sure. So I ran at the end of my freshman year. I ran for academic affairs representative, an older student who I really respected and admired, who had served on student council himself, asked me to run, recruited me to run. I had a lot of exciting ideas about academic reform and the kind of the policy changes I wanted to make. But soon after becoming a member of student council and for the year that I was on, it was really noticeable and unsettling the extent to which the Arab-Israeli conflict and sort of the looming BDS vote that we all knew was coming kind of hovered around everything that we did and was sort of it felt very much like the elephant in the room. Whenever student council had to really do anything, it felt like it was really implicating and impacting the decisions that were being made. I think the conflict on Columbia's campus is very, very prevalent in elections, who decides to run, what their platform is, particularly evident in endorsements, student organizations endorsing certain candidates, I think very often on this issue. And I also think it is the turnout issue among students in terms of actually voting on student council elections. We had a referendum my sophomore spring. It was probably the most challenging 4 hours I've had as a Columbia student. I remember, and I will say, to me, as sort of an honest disclosure, I still feel very conflicted about my relationship with Israel and my politics and my Zionism. I remember walking into the room, carrying all of my, my nuance and my own conflict, and seeing hundreds of students waiting to get into the room, packing into this tiny room that we had. And I kind of felt in that moment what polarization feels like. I think we often talk about we are so polarized politically on campus in the country, but I'm not sure if everyone knows physiologically what polarization actually feels like. I really felt it in that moment. I felt very defensive and very kind of on edge. It was a 4-hour meeting. It was voted down my sophomore year. I think it was 20 no votes and 17 yes votes. I decided that I wasn't going to run again because of how extreme the animosity that was unleashed by that vote really was. And also something that my mom actually said to me that I really found fascinating, I still think a lot about, which was after the vote, I called her and I said, it voted down, it didn't pass. And she said, I still think you should resign. And I said, wait, but what? Like, it didn't pass. Why would I resign now? And she said, because for 4 hours, Jewish peers of yours shared how they felt that this marginalized them, targeted them, made them feel alone, made them feel isolated on their own campus. And 17 of your peers on student council still voted yes. And for that, you should still resign. I ended up not taking her advice at that moment. I finished out my term, but I quickly decided that student council was not where I wanted to spend my energy because I think that there are ways to address this issue on campus and they are not in the student council arena.
Did you have any response from, by the way, that's a smart, like, got a smart mom who's got good wisdom. But I wonder, what was the reaction of your peers? Either the ones on student government or other friends outside of student government?
So I'll say two quick things. One, many of my close, immediate friends who are not Jewish thought it made complete sense that I would not run again. Even for non-Jews, it is very clear how the Arab-Israeli conflict really colors everything that Student Council does. Student Council really does not do much, in my experience, doesn't do much to actually impact the lives of students until that referendum. And then all focus is on it. Campus really turns its attention towards this. So my non-Jewish friends were not surprised that I did not want to be involved in sort of in the divisiveness. I will say that after the vote, I got an outpouring of private messages and texts and emails from Jewish students on campus, some that I knew and some that I didn't know, thanking me for the things that I said in the meeting and eventually for my no vote. Thank you for standing up for us. Thank you for speaking for us. I think one of them, I remember very vividly, called me a defender of the Jewish people. And, that's like biblical language. I mean, you'd call like David a defender of the Jewish people. That's how intense and how personal this feels. And so my decision to not run again, I definitely felt like I had let some of those students down, that they had trusted me to speak for them and defend them and advocate for them. And I was electing not to continue. And that was really hard. I wrestled with that for a long time. I talked to my parents a lot about it. But I did feel like it was such a toll on my own well-being that I couldn't continue and still be a full-time student at the same time, or didn't feel like I could really be authentically me in my other commitments while staying on student council. But I did feel sad and very some guilt of letting the students down that had seen me as an advocate for them.
Hear that. I don't mean to add to this, but I know that there's going to be another BDS vote that's coming up at Columbia University this next fall.
Yeah.
I believe. And what do you think of that development?
I think it's challenging. I think it's another one of these. I mean, we've had many of them. I think this is 3 and 4 years. They're exhausting. They are all campus kind of turns on this issue, and campus feels really on edge and really divided. I still don't necessarily think that student council is the avenue to have this conversation. I think that there are other channels to do it, but it did pass through student council last year, so it will be an all campus referendum. There have been some challenges with language, how these things are worded, and how can you boil this conflict down into a yes/no question. There are definitely challenges there. I know many of my peers, I have peers on both sides who I know who are, really working diligently on this. Me personally, I kind of want nothing to do with it anymore. I quietly know how I will vote, but it makes me upset to see a campus that I love and a community that I love so dearly really split into on this. And so I'm sad that it's coming again. I don't expect to take so public and so visible a role.
I appreciate that. Segueing over to Mara, who's sitting there with the most beautiful background. You could pause. Is that a fake background? Is that a fake? No. Zoom's getting really good these days at creating backgrounds. Mara, you were involved in a campaign to make student government more equitable for Jewish students. Can you discuss the campaign that you started at NYU?
Yeah, definitely. So this campaign, it was called Our SGA Student Government Assembly. And the impetus behind the naming was that SGA, as it was, didn't stand for us. It didn't represent the student body, and it just wasn't doing the best it could. And so the kind of reasons behind the creation of this campaign were twofold. And so earlier I kind of described the student government layout a little, but what I didn't really get into was that there's roughly a 2% voter turnout across the student body at NYU. Like that's abysmal. To have 2% of the roughly 50,000 undergraduate students having a say into who is representing them and making decisions for the entire campus. So that was the first problem right there. And the senators at large that I described, so the senators who represent a self-selected constituency, such as study abroad students or student athletes or LGBTQ students or Black students, those students are appointed by the outgoing senators at large. So it's a small committee of existing student government members who select the incoming student government members. And there's no set slate of these are the constituencies who will be represented. So for the majority of my time at NYU, the only representative of Jewish students, the self-determined Jewish student representative, was also the president of Jewish Voice for Peace. And so while she did a great job at representing her niche Jewish community, she was, and she even said so herself, was not representative of the Jewish community at large. And so that kind of gets at the second reason behind the whole movement, to make sure all students have a say, or to make sure all students had a say proportionate to their representation in the student body. And it would be a little bit, I think, dishonest to gloss over the fact that there was an impending BDS resolution at the time. And so this was it was partially motivated by the fact that we wanted a Jewish voice in the room when this vote was going to be held, because the Jewish voice was not represented. There was no one there to make our case. But in tandem with that, we wanted to bring attention to the larger issue of not just that there was no Jewish voice in the room, but why there was no Jewish voice in the room.
Do you think, so I'm looking at this 2% that you said originally of like who's voting. And do you think this 2%, or not even the 2%, but actually student government is aware of the diversity on campus when making decisions? Or do you think that, like, are they aware of the issue that exists?
I think they try to be. I think from the conversations that I had with individual student government members throughout this process, I think they recognize that it's their duty to represent the student body, because, they didn't just apply to student government willy-nilly like Zach. Like, a lot of thought and effort was put into it for these few people. But I think it's just human nature to be sometimes a little short-sighted. And you, as much as you might want to have the interests of everybody in mind, at a certain point, you're not going to be able to, because you just don't have the same background as everybody. You don't have the same experiences, and you just don't have the same concerns.
Yeah, no, I can hear that. I know that AJC found that our SGA was quite successful, or was a good program as well, and honored the program with the Sharon Green Award at Global Forum last year for its efforts. And so we commend you on really having built this new platform for diverse voices. So great job. No, we really do appreciate it. I want to segue us over to some other questions. We've got a number of topics that I know people who are currently on campus and off care quite a bit about. And the first one I'm going to ask is kind of a large question. So I would say try to keep it to 2 minutes, each of you, even though I know you can probably go for half an hour. Why do you think student governments put so much focus on BDS or Zionism or Israel on campus? We'll go with Jack, who I know just has sitting there very patiently.
Awesome. So I guess my personal experience with, I guess, why BDS and why is such a big issue for students is just, in my student government, a lot of people kind of associate with other groups, and if they hear or see that like they're being oppressed or they aren't being represented, they like all stand together, and that kind of puts people who are elected, puts various senators in a position where they want to support that group when they don't necessarily know everything they need to know about that specific issue. So it kind of turns into a thing where we, like, historically, like, we've had BDS referendums, we've brought different resolutions through student government the past few years. It's almost like students feel like they have an obligation to put this forward, even if they don't necessarily understand it, which is tough when there's like so many other things you could focus your time and energy on. And it's really sad. And I know there's a couple of student governments, I know possibly Michigan, where they won't even hear BDS resolutions because they don't see it as their place. So I'm hoping in the future like that our student government takes that tone. Sadly, I'm not going to be there, so I don't know how I'll make sure that happens, but yeah, I guess that's pretty much it.
You'll pop into Urbana-Champaign from time to time.
Yeah, no, definitely.
Mara, go that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I think your viewpoint on Israel has just become almost this litmus test for, are you progressive enough? If you don't come out and outwardly say you're anti-Israel, then the conclusion is drawn that you don't care about Palestinian human rights. And that's extended to, you don't care about anyone's human rights. And that's extended to, you're a racist colonial oppressor. And the logic there is just so flawed. And I think that's just one of the many, many problems. I think people don't want to take the time, and especially like student governments, don't want to take the time to understand the nuance there. And just the fact that, there's not this one end all be all that sums up a person's political ideology, and so you don't need to focus on Israel in order to determine in order to prove that you're a progressive student government. And I kind of lost track of the question. Sorry.
You got it. You answered the question. No worries. Over to Zach.
Yeah, I was going to start with a very similar idea that I've talked to a few of my friends about this, but there is this sort of often, I think, unspoken list of what do you need to do to be a good liberal on campus? What do you need to be a good progressive on campus? And this list is kind of implicitly suggested, I think, to new students as they come to schools, especially schools like NYU and Columbia that are kind of famous for the sort of the activist culture. And chief among them is Free Palestine. That is item 1 on the list. And all subsequent items on the list, you can't get to items 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if you don't go through 1. That's the way the list works. And so that makes it very challenging for student governments, which might want to, be active and be progressive on other issues, condemning gun violence, condemning hate crimes around the country, doing other things. But it also makes it incredibly challenging for Jewish students, the vast majority of whom align on the political left, right? The majority of American Jews are on the political left. But if we have constructed a campus culture where we cannot meaningfully participate in the movements of the political left on our own campuses because we have to check our Zionism or check our Judaism at the door, then you have created a really alienating campus culture. I think for whatever reason, student governments have been identified as the channel when perhaps others exist. I know at Columbia, there is a committee that reports to the president about socially responsible investing. It has student representatives on it. For whatever reason, the groups that support BDS have chosen to go through student council as opposed to going directly to the committee. But I think the larger issue is something that Mara was really saying, but also this sort of a campus culture that is really limiting and is really powerful, but operates in really unspoken and kind of very subtle ways at times.
I get the sense, and I don't want to speak for anybody, so I'm just going to ask, and you can say yes or no. I'm getting the sense that these resolutions, referendums, are taking up a lot of time in student government. Am I mistaken? Is there any feel from even your peers or fellow SGA members that that kind of the debates end up taking away valuable time from organizing other initiatives or programs? Are there any initiatives or programs that you were hoping to kind of roll out that you did not end up seeing come to fruition? Curious.
I guess I have one. So I guess near the end of my term, I was like really looking into like I guess, people in high school and their opportunities to like attend a college. And at U of I, we have a thing called Illinois Commitment, which allows low-income students to come here for free. But our campus necessarily wasn't doing an outstanding job at maybe advertising that. So I wanted to maybe create a link between our student government with like various schools across the state of Illinois to like let the students know, whether they're freshmen, sophomores, juniors, that Illinois is like looking for them to attend there, and they have opportunities outside of their outside of maybe what they think they can do. And I really towards the end of my term, a lot of the energy was taken towards our BDS resolution, and then subsequently like COVID and everything else. So that's one thing I wish I could have done, but really wasn't able to.
I'm going to move us over to the next question because I realize that we are actually moving through our time rather fast. One school of thought is to just let student governments do what they will and not give the BDS movement any attention or recognition. Why not just allow BDS to pass and then disappear from the campus discourse? Why not let it just play out?
Nobody else minds. I mean, I think that is very tempting, and I think that would save us a lot of effort and energy in the short term. But I think the long-term ramifications of that would be that these students in student government, even if the conversation doesn't escape that room, if we let it pass and let it slide, the students that are in student government today are going to be the adults that are in government in 10, 20 years. They're the next generation of leaders. And so that letting it slide to me would be telling them, you know, I'm okay with this ideology. I'm okay with being bulldozed in this way. I'm okay with not forcing you to look at the nuance and challenge your perspective. And I think that would just be incredibly damaging.
Anybody else?
I'll speak really quickly. I think there have been moments where I have definitely thought about this as a strategy. Just let it go, and then inevitably, the president of our university will say, "Well, no, we aren't doing this," as our president has said on record numerous times. But I will say two things about that I think are tricky about it. The first is that it plays into a very easy narrative about kind of Jewish control and Jewish influence, which is already sort of a very popular anti-Semitic trope. Because if BDS passes democratically across the student body, and then the president comes out and says, no, we're not doing this, then immediately it's, oh, the Jewish donors threatened to pull all their money. And they control the university. And that's really damaging, I think, for obvious reasons. The second is I think that it would only, even if it passed, it would continually still flare up. Columbia is continually developing more relationships with Israeli universities, opening a global center in Tel Aviv. I think they've made plans to actually announce that soon. But a new program with Tel Aviv University, more and more relationships. And I think that even if BDS passed, these issues would continue to flare up. And this is something that I really want to emphasize for people watching, college students coming into school next year. The conversations that I have within my Jewish community at Columbia, I have with my parents, with my friends at school who are Jewish, often they are conversations about 1967. They are conversations about two states. They are conversations about settlements and occupation and two states living side by side in dignity and peace. The conversation that the pro-BDS students are often having is not a 67 conversation at all, but is actually a 48 conversation, is actually a right to exist conversation. And so Jewish students have really lively debates within ourselves about, what should we do? What should happen with settlements or occupation? But then when we go outside of the Jewish community, we cannot actually dig into the nuances because we are so defensive and actually just fighting for 48 right to exist. And I think there will continue to be flare-ups and continue to be conflict, even if it passes, because they're actually more interested in 48 than they are in 67 or 73 or any of the other major years. They're interested in existence. We are interested in conflict resolution.
Jack, anything to add to those?
Yeah, I guess I kind of have a little bit of a different experience with that. Obviously, I'm not Jewish, so I don't know like the personal effects that BDS has. But when we passed our BDS resolution and it came to whether we veto it or not, one thing that was like super striking with me is when we met with all like the Jewish student leaders on our campus, just like the emotion and just sadness they felt that our student government would do that to them. So I think by like letting it pass, it kind of just accepts the idea that Jewish students aren't going to be represented. And another concern that Jewish students like voiced to me is that that's going to make other Jewish students not want to attend our specific university. So I don't necessarily think that's the best way forward, given that it's almost like we're abandoning the right to like support the Jewish community on our campus. But.
Thank you, all three of you. I will tell you, we have a number of questions that have come in from the audience. So here's how it's going to work. It's like lightning round. I'm going to throw out the question, and then whoever's answering it gets about 1.5 minutes to answer, and we'll kind of just go through. If you want to add on to somebody else's, feel free to. We have a couple of them that are coming in from students all over the country. Okay, the first question we have coming in is for a man named Nathaniel. Thank you, Nathaniel, who's at Tufts right now. He says, much anti-Israel advocacy these days involves entangling the Arab-Israeli conflict with domestic societal issues in the US. At Tufts, where I go to school, for example, SJP promotes the, quote, end the deadly exchange, end quote, campaign, which attempts to place blame for police brutality in America on Israel. How can we counter rhetoric that links Israel to problems in American society without invalidating students' legitimate concerns? I'm going to ask just the last question part of it, because that's also, how can we counter rhetoric that links Israel to problems in American society without invalidating students' legitimate concerns?
I think that's a tough one. And I think it would be irresponsible to say I have the answer to that. I think that's something that I've been working through, and that I tried to work through and tried to address to the best of my ability during my time at NYU. And I think you phrased your question even incredibly well, and that shows that you're already doing the work that needs to be done. Just even the concern for not invalidating others' concerns, I think, is the most important part. And so I think just the way to I could give you a fact sheet specifically about the deadly exchange, but that wouldn't really be helpful right now. I think what you need is just to be able to look at someone in the eye and be able to say, I hear you. I see where you're coming from. I understand why you feel this way. I understand where you get that perspective, and not just brush that off. And so I think you can't have any productive conversation without kind of that preface.
Anything to add? Thank you, Mara.
I guess I'll add a little bit. One of the most like telling conversations I had was when I was meeting with the provost with my president Connor, and he told us that we're combined together and have the same opinions on so many issues, but what makes like good leaders is if you're able to have like those tough conversations about things you disagree with. And I think on campuses, especially when it comes to Israel, it's really hard to have those conversations without offending the other person or feel like it's a personal attack. So I think if we can just find a way to have like what Mara said, like recognize their concerns, recognize how they're feeling, and then tell them how you're feeling and let them know like the position you're coming from. I guess just productive conversation. And I know it's very tough to have, and it's not like a simple issue. Like that's such an amazing question, but I think it starts with that and just letting your opinion be known and how you feel.
Anything to add before we move on? Okay, great. Don't worry, we got plenty of questions. This was actually, Mara, you win because you answered first, so now you get another question. No, I'm kidding. It was geared towards you, but anybody can answer after you answer, Mara, which is, at the start of your remarks, Mara, you described how members of student government are selected to represent varied identities. Do you think this is a flawed system in that it encourages polarization?
I don't necessarily think it's a flaw in that student government allows this space, because I do think our various identities are incredibly important parts of us. I think, I need representation on student government as a Jewish student. I need representation. I need someone advocating for me as a woman. I need someone advocating for me as a student who struggles with mental health. And so I think those are all examples of constituencies that have been represented with the senator at large position. And I think those are all things that need to be there. I think if you don't explicitly have a senator who's saying, I'm representing African-American students, I'm representing women in STEM, that voice isn't going to be heard. And so I think it needs to be there. But I just think that the way that it is there right now is incredibly flawed. And so I think it's tough. I think you're never going to be able to give a voice to every single sliver of every identity, but you need to be able to try.
Anybody else before I move on?
I just completely agree with what Mara said. We have a similar structure of kind of interest and identity-based representation. And I think it's incredibly valuable, sort of in my role as academic affairs rep, the conversations I was able to have with sort of the other reps. My friend who was first gen low income rep really helped me inform my thinking, so that when I went in to meet with the Dean of Academic Affairs, I was not only coming with the perspective of my academic experience and my friends, but also this other student who had this mandate to represent a certain constituency. So kind of all the more powerful in advocating for the needs of students. I think I think it is really, really important. Obviously not going to represent everyone, but I do think those kind of representation is important. Absolutely.
Next question. A student from Chicago is asking, in your opinion, how do we go from here? How can we actually create true conversation geared towards improving the lives of those impacted by the situation in Israel/Palestine without vilifying Israel or pro-Israel students? It's a thought-provoking question. Anybody?
I think a couple of things. I think one, and I'm gonna say something I said earlier again, just because I think it has been really clarifying for me, is that I think often when we engage in these conversations on our campuses, at least in my experience, we actually really talk over each other, because we are actually not having the same conversation at all. To speak of a two-state solution, to speak of 1967, to speak of to have that conversation next to a 1948, a right to exist, calling into question Israel's right to exist as a Jewish and democratic state, you're gonna miss. You're going to obviously miss each other and run into conflict as a result. And I think the reason why there is so much kind of fear and feeling of targeting and isolation, alienation among Jewish students on campuses is because that 48 conversation is it's very scary. I mean, it is a scary conversation. Whereas I think 67, in my experience, that conversation, a two-state solution conversation, students are much more willing to have. I think if we can more explicitly name that we are actually having two different conversations and we are not, two sides of the same debate, but are actually having very different conversations. Free. I remember after the BDS vote my sophomore year, the entire meeting was sort of, we are not advocating for the destruction of Israel. The pro-BDS side, we're not advocating for the destruction of Israel. We are not advocating for this, not a one-state solution, not advocating for the destruction of Israel. And then after the vote failed, the immediate chant that was heard all across the student center was from the river to the sea, right? So we are having two different conversations. And if we can more explicitly name that, and that can be kind of front and center, I think our conversations will be a lot more productive and a lot less emotional and just go nowhere. Right now, when you talk like this, you are bound to go nowhere. But when you can actually meet on a common ground and talk about the differences between those two strands of the conversation, maybe then you can actually get something substantive done.
Gotcha. Last question, and everyone has about 15 seconds to answer it. This one's for all of our students out there. What's a piece of advice you would give students watching this program who really want to join student government on campus? And go.
Okay, I'll start. Oh gosh,
Yeah.
15 seconds. I mean, just do it. Don't let anything hold you back. Just go for it. But also make sure you're doing it for the right reasons. And I know this is going to go over 15 seconds, but I'll try and talk quickly. I think something that has really plagued me my entire time at NYU is just this notion that the Jewish community only shows up for themselves. And I don't know exactly the demographic breakdown of everyone on this call. I'm going to assume the vast majority of you are Jewish. Make sure if you want to be in student government, you're not just there to be the Jewish voice in the room. It's really important to be the Jewish voice in the room, but that's not all you are. There's so much more. And I mean, just thinking about the state of the world right now, recent events, this past weekend, everything that is happening, you need to be an ally for other people if you want them to be an ally for you.
Okay, very quickly, Zach.
I would say, stay true to your opinion and your nuance. I think very often there is a pressure and a tendency to move towards an extreme position and to blot out nuance and to blot out internal conflict. Stay true to your nuance, and also I would say have effective outlets for stress release. I mean, have peers who know about your experience, talk to your friends about it, family perhaps, mentors, advisors. It is going to be intense. College campuses are very intense places at times. And I hope you do run. I hope you do get elected, but make sure you have some outlets as well to stay sane on the job.
10 seconds. Jack, go for it.
Awesome. I would say do it. There's so many great things you can do. Don't let this specific issue stop you from wanting to be a part of it, because aside from this, even though it will be intense and take up a lot of time and debate, and it's incredibly important, you can do so much more if you join student government. So I would definitely say it's a good thing to get involved in.
Thank you so much to Mara, Jack, Zach, and Jackie for this wonderful conversation. During these difficult times, we're taking solace in knowing that while students can't be together in person, we can still maintain our communities virtually. The AJC Campus Crash Course is an ongoing program, and it's here to help maintain student community. So we're so happy that you were able to join in today. Please be sure to check out AJC's Advocacy Anywhere website to find out when our next Campus Crash Course will be, and to register for AJC Global Forum taking place June 14th through 18th, 2020. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.